The cab dropped me off in front of the building at 5 o'clock sharp. I didn't want to trouble anyone to pick me up. At 70, I can still manage a 2-block walk with my bag and my pride neatly pressed. As I climbed the steps, Ethan opened the door before I could knock. He hugged me tightly, his lanky frame still carrying a hint of that babyish cologne. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he whispered in my ear. "You're gonna love what we put together." I stepped inside slowly. The living room was decked out with handmade paper garlands, photos of me from different eras taped up with golden ribbon, and on the table, a white tablecloth with lavender napkins folded into little stars. I recognized Ethan's handwriting on the cardboard place cards. Grandma, Dad, Claire, Ms. Linda, Aunt Maggie. Claire emerged from the kitchen with a tray of sliders and a smile so perfectly practiced it almost hurt to look at. Right on time. "Eleanor." "As always," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Ethan insisted on making this year special. You know how he gets with his projects." "Thank you for having me," I replied, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot. Not today. I settled into the armchair by the window. From there, I could see Michael, my son, slicing cheese at the counter. He didn't look up until Ethan called, "Dad, come on. Grandma's here." He walked over, kissed my forehead, and went back to fussing with something in the kitchen. The afternoon passed with lukewarm greetings, scattered conversations, and the hum of soft jazz Claire had chosen. She said, to keep things relaxed. I nodded, thanked, smiled. But inside, something felt off, like a pulse beating out of rhythm. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrent, kept bustling in and out with trays, arranging details, perfecting every corner. You could tell he'd poured his heart into it. I wasn't expecting much. No gifts, no speeches, no grand gestures, just a day with family, but something about the way Claire glided through the room, controlling every move, every word, made me feel like I was balancing on a tightrope, and for reasons I couldn't name. I started counting to 10 in my head, just in case I had to hold my composure by my fingernails. By 5:30, the guests started arriving. First was Ethan's teacher, Ms. Linda, a warm but slightly nervous woman who couldn't stop praising my grandson. I offered her a seat and thanked her genuinely for looking after him at school. Then came Maggie, the neighbor from upstairs, carrying a bottle of wine in a bag with little daisies. Finally, two of Michael's co-workers showed up, one with a tray of bruschetta, the other with a look so lost you'd think he'd been dragged here. Claire greeted each one with her sweet, measured tone, like she was reading from a script. She moved back and forth with plates, napkins, glasses, but every time she passed me, she'd drop a line laced with subtle venom. "Hope the music isn't too much for you, Eleanor. You know, at your age, things can get overwhelming. Or, must be nice to have all that free time in retirement. I envy not having responsibilities sometimes." Some guests laughed awkwardly. Others pretended not to hear. I stayed put, watching. The guests said nothing. And worse, some nodded along. Michael, as usual, hid in the kitchen, checking the oven or inspecting the sparkling cider. I sometimes wonder if he's trained himself to vanish when it matters most. Ethan caught my eye and flashed a smile every time our gazes met. His way of moving among the adults, trying to make everyone comfortable, tugged at my heart. It was clear he'd worked hard on this gathering. That's why I stayed calm. For him, Ms. Linda, trying to lighten the mood, mentioned how much she loved the photo decorations from my life. "What a rich story you have, Eleanor," she said with genuine kindness. Claire jumped in without missing a beat. "Oh, rich in old tales." though I'm not sure how much of that interests younger folks. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly at her words, but he didn't speak. He pressed his lips together and headed back to the kitchen, with purpose. I followed him with my eyes as he opened the fridge to check something wrapped in foil, and in that moment, I knew he felt it too. Something was wrong. Ethan came out of the kitchen, hands steady on a tray, walking with a solemn focus, like he was carrying a fragile secret. Everyone fell silent as he entered. Michael finally turned around, and Claire stepped aside without a word. When the cake reached the center of the table, I pressed a hand to my chest. It was beautiful. On the white frosting, an edible image displayed a collage of photos, one in black and white from my college days at 20, another with my husband on our first summer in Cape Cod, a more recent one, hugging Ethan on his first day of school. Framing the images was a border of flowers painted in soft pastels, with the number 70 written in a child's scrawl. I designed it myself, Ethan said, eyes fixed on my face. The bakery lady let me pick the photos. I wanted it to be a beautiful summary of your life. I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat burned. I reached out and touched the edge of the tray, as if I could thank him without words. The guests began clapping softly, some with genuine smiles, others still uneasy from the lingering tension. But then Claire, leaning against the doorway, let a comment slip like a pebble into still water. 70 years aren't celebrated with sugar. They're celebrated with quiet. The chatter stopped. The air grew thick. Michael blinked, but said nothing. Neither did I. I looked at Claire. She was smiling, but her eyes weren't. Ethan turned his head slowly, as if hearing her from a distance. He didn't respond. He just picked up a candle, placed it gently on the cake, and handed me a box of matches. I lit the candle, never breaking eye contact with my daughter-in-law. In that moment, I knew she wouldn't ruin this memory. But what I didn't yet know was that the worst was still to come. When we dimmed the lights and Ethan gave the signal to start singing, I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in weeks. The voices rose, clumsy but heartfelt, and the little candle flickered under the warmth of so many breaths. I smiled not for the song, but because Ethan was looking at me with a pride I couldn't quite describe. But then, just as the song hit "Happy Birthday to You," Claire stood up. Not abruptly, her movements were calm, deliberate, like she was following a rehearsed script. She walked to the table, nudged an empty glass aside with 2 fingers, and without looking at anyone, lifted the cake tray. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice low but clear. "She doesn't deserve a party. What are we celebrating a lonely retiree before anyone could react?" She walked to the kitchen, opened the trash can, and dropped the cake with a dull thud. The sound was so stark in its simplicity that for a moment, I thought someone had smashed an entire set of dishes. The still-lit candle snuffed out against the plastic, and the edible photos, my memories were crushed among orange peels and used napkins. Ethan didn't move, neither did Michael. The guests looked down. No one clapped anymore. No one spoke. I stood up slowly, not out of dignity, but because my legs refused to carry the weight of that moment. I crossed the room with steady steps, past Claire, who stood by the trash like a satisfied statue, and took a deep breath to speak. But I said nothing. I turned back, returned to the table, and poured myself a glass of water. Ethan was still there, clutching the box of matches. He looked at me with wide eyes, searching for a signal. Slowly, I walked to him, took his hand, and whispered, "Thank you for trying." And in that instant, without warning, he let go of the matches, pulled his tablet from the sideboard drawer, and connected it to the living room TV. I didn't cry. Not a single muscle in my face gave way to the tremor inside. I walked to the center of the room, breathed slowly, and addressed the guests with the calmest voice I could muster. Thank you all for coming. Truly. Some offered timid smiles. Others just looked down, caught between discomfort and secondhand shame. Claire stood motionless, her back to the trash can, arms crossed, her expression dry, almost defiant. I was about to return to my armchair by the window, to sit as if nothing had happened, when a small hand gripped mine. It was Ethan. He didn't speak. He just looked at me with eyes burning with something I couldn't fully read. Pain. Yes, but also resolve. Still holding my hand, he walked to the TV stand, pulled his tablet from a black case, and connected it with a short cable. The TV flickered on, showing his home screen among the icons. One file stood out in bold capitals. For Grandma. Today, Grandma, he said finally. I brought a surprise, too. I didn't quite understand. I thought it might be a video of photos, a montage of memories, something like the cake now buried in trash. But his tone told me otherwise. Ethan grabbed the remote, turned up the volume slightly, and stood by my side. Every guest turned toward the screen. Claire shifted her head just a fraction. I made this alone, with some help from Mr. Victor, my tech teacher. He taught me how to edit and save the important stuff. The lights were still dim, as they had been during the song, but now, instead of a candle's glow, the room was lit by the screen's flicker, ready to reveal what Ethan had kept to himself until that moment. The video started without preamble. The screen showed a shaky image, filmed from the hallway. Claire's voice came through, clear and confident. If Michael doesn't step up, I'll handle it. That woman can't keep meddling. She needs a nursing home. There are private facilities where no one notices if you stop visiting. Some guests shifted in their seats. Ms. Linda covered her mouth. Claire stepped toward the TV, as if to turn it off. But Ethan fixed her with a steady gaze and spoke without raising his voice. It's saved in the cloud. You can't delete it. The next clip was from a conversation in the kitchen while I napped in the living room. Claire. On the phone. Of course Michael's soft. He's always been a mama's boy. That's why I've got him wrapped around my finger. But I need to make sure she doesn't get a dime. The house is ours, and it'll be legally ours soon. A pang hit my chest, but I didn't look away. I stood still, not out of pride, but because Ethan was beside me. And if he was brave, I couldn't falter. The third clip showed Claire in this same room, wine glass in hand, talking to a friend. The old lady thinks she's clever, but she doesn't know Michael signed the power of attorney. If we get her admitted for cognitive decline, it's done. Everything stays with us. Beside me, Michael let out a heavy breath. Ethan didn't look at him. He just moved to the next file. In it, Claire smirked. Let her enjoy her retirement while it lasts. When she falls, I won't pick up the phone. Mothers-in-law are like mold. You get used to them until they choke you. I don't know when the murmurs stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. The final clip was recent. Claire reviewing papers with a lawyer, saying, and if she manages to make a will, we'll contest it. She's over 70. There's got to be a way to invalidate it for mental incompetence. Then the video stopped. The room felt frozen in an eternal second, and for the first time, I felt free of fear. The silence after the video wasn't peaceful. It wasn't the kind that invites reflection. It was heavy, sharp. Like everyone in the room had to choose between staring at the floor or facing the truth. I didn't move. Ethan's hand was still warm and firm in mine. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The words had already been spoken by the one they least expected. Then Michael stepped forward. His voice was hoarse, low, but steady. "Is this what you think of my mother?" And our son Claire blinked. Her polished smile faded. She took a step toward him. "Michael, it's not like that. They took it out of context. You know how I get when I'm stressed." "No," he cut her off. "This isn't stress. It's calculated. It's contempt. You talked about putting my mother in a home, taking what's hers. And Ethan? When did you stop listening to him so much that you didn't notice he'd been recording you for weeks?" Her mouth opened. But no one was listening anymore. Guests avoided her gaze. Some quietly grabbed their coats, as if the air had become unbreathable. Claire pointed at me, desperate. This is her fault. Always playing the victim. Always manipulating. She even got the kid to betray me. Michael took another step toward her. "Don't talk about her like that. Not her. Not him. Not anymore." And with those words, something broke not just in Claire's voice, but in the fragile structure of the house, in the unhealthy balance we'd all upheld for years. Ethan looked down. I felt his hand loosen in mine, as if he'd finally let go of a weight. Then Michael turned to me. He looked me in the eyes not with shame or fear, but like he was seeing me for the first time in years. And that crack in his voice, in his stance, was also the start of something unstoppable. I don't know who recorded it. Maybe Ms. Linda, or one of Michael's co-workers who didn't know what to do with their hands. But by the next day, the video was online, not just the cake in the trash scene, but Ethan's carefully crafted file too. The title was brutal. Grandma humiliated over her birthday cake, but her grandson had a plan. In less than 24 hours, it racked up over 50,000 views. Comments poured in an incredible grandmother, the bravest kid ever, the manipulative daughter-in-law of the year. I didn't comment. I didn't respond to interview requests or messages from strangers. I had no interest in becoming anyone's symbol. What surprised me was what came next. Claire got a call from Ethan's school. They wanted to discuss the child's emotional environment after seeing the video. Soon after, the community center where she led workshops suspended her participation, saying it wasn't consistent to promote family values with such a tarnished public image. Michael started sleeping on the couch. I don't know if it was his choice or a silent mandate, but when Ethan called me one afternoon from his room to say his dad had apologized to him, I knew something was shifting in that house. I didn't celebrate. I took no joy in the punishments or the public shaming, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the truth had found its place, not by shouting or destroying, but by simply showing itself. When the school principal called to invite me to speak at a community event for grandparents, I accepted not to tell my story, but because I knew there were others who hadn't yet found their voice. And if Ethan had taught me anything, it's that change can start with just turning on a screen. 3 days after that, party turned something else. I took a bus to downtown Boston. I didn't tell anyone. In my bag was a folder with deeds, certificates, papers I'd never wanted to look at too closely. I walked into the notary's office unhurried. The air smelled of wood and formality. The notary greeted me kindly, though his eyes grew curious when I said plainly, "I want to rewrite my will from scratch." I explained the essentials without embellishment. My house? My savings? Everything my husband and I had built with hard work, it wasn't going to my blood relatives anymore. I wanted to create a fund, named simply the Ruth Fund, after my mother, who'd been silenced for too many years. A fund for older women suffering psychological abuse in their own homes. Ethan would be its symbolic guardian, not legally, but in spirit. Because that boy had shown me that courage has no age and needs no permission. The notary wrote in silence, with the gravity of someone who knows they're not just drafting a document, but marking an end and a beginning outside. I sat at a nearby cafe and ordered a latte. I pulled out a small notebook and wrote 3 things: the date, the fund's name, and a phrase that came to me from nowhere. What isn't passed on with respect isn't inherited by right. That night, I emailed Michael. No accusations. I told him my decision in clear words. I didn't need justifications or permission just for him to know. He didn't reply right away, but the next morning, when I opened the window, I saw Ethan standing outside my building, backpack slung over his shoulder, eyes full of that mix of pride and sadness only he could blend. He came upstairs without a word. He hugged me. Then, with a shy smile, he said, "You know what Mom asked when she read your email? What do we get then?" He shrugged and added, and I told her. Maybe the one thing we were missing the truth. The high school auditorium was packed not just with students, but parents, teachers, and some local social workers. They'd organized a series of talks on family respect and coexistence, and Ethan had been invited to close the event with his speech. I sat in the 4th row, next to the school counselor. No one knew exactly who I was, and I preferred it that way. I just wanted to watch. When Ethan took the stage, I saw him grip his paper tightly. He wore a white shirt and had a shorter haircut than usual. He took a deep breath and began, his voice steady. Today, I want to talk about the kind of violence that doesn't leave bruises. I listened as he described how words, gestures, and silences can hurt as much as blows, without naming names. He explained what it was like to live in a house where silence was the norm and contempt was served with dinner. He showed edited clips of his video. No faces or specifics, just words. Just truths. And at the end, he said, "My name is Ethan, and I had to record to be heard. But now I'm not afraid, because I learned that breaking the silence is also a way to love." The applause was long, not loud, but the kind that feels like an embrace. I didn't clap. I clasped my hands in my lap until my fingers ached. Tears fell without permission, not from sadness, but from something older relief. Claire didn't come. Neither did Michael, and I didn't expect them to. Not anymore. That night, back home, I climbed the fire escape to the roof, an old habit from nights with my husband when we'd watch the stars without interruption. I lit a small candle and set it by the old antenna. I sat on a blanket, looking out at the sleeping city. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't take revenge with noise. I won by planting awareness, and my grandson was the first bloom.